coming out. Before we sort of dig into our discussion topics, we're going to take a look at a few clips from each of the panelists here. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce them a bit. And I believe they're going to play in the order that we have up there. So the first one is Marshall Curry. So Marshall, can you just say very briefly what it is we're going to see a clip from here?
It is just a movie trailer for one of my films, If a Tree Falls, about the Earth Liberation Front.
Very good. Let's take a look.
Not point and shoot.
It's
point and shoot. Okay, it's
point and shoot.
Okay,
there we go. Thank you, Marshall. And Judith, can you say a little bit about? Are we looking at a trailer for Cooked? No.
The trailer's being cut by. The trailer's currently being cut by Jillian Schlesinger somewhere in Brooklyn right now.
Okay.
As we speak, but I know this is a scene sort of from the middle of the movie Cooked, which is about the politics of disaster and disaster preparedness and whether or not it's possible to redefine disaster now as extreme disparity, extreme poverty, and the long-term impact of structural racism instead of waiting for an extreme weather event. So this is the middle of a movie and sort of how I come to start to really think like that. And the guy who is speaking is the guy who counted all of the heat deaths that took place in Chicago in 1995 when 739 people died in 1 week, which most of us, even years later, we're like, it really should be a blueprint for how we think about disaster, and it never became that. So the movie starts with that, and it turns into this.
Thank you. And Doug, do you want to say a little bit about what we're going to take a look at from your work, please?
Yes. So when Eric asked me to be part of this, and then Dave and I spoke, we went from we were going to show a trailer. Instead, I just put 5 little clips together of things that I've been working on this or have worked on this fall. And I'll just quick. One is the trailer, a little bit of the trailer for Bisbee 17, which I produced. I'm not sure the exact order, but I think one is for Oracle. Like a little branded movie, or we can have a whole panel debating what the terms are, but it means is brand paid for, is I guess I'd say it. And then something for a film I directed called Brewmaster, I think something for Corona Beer, and a couple other things like that. But basically jobs, I guess would be the way to put it. 2 films and a couple jobs.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. And returning to the stage, Stephanie is going to say a little bit about what we're going to see from you.
So I just included this piece that I just did. It launched about 2 weeks ago for the midterm elections for Planned Parenthood. It's part of their Unstoppable campaign. They asked, I think, 13 female artists to contribute to this new campaign they launched around this idea that we are unstoppable. So this is just a minute and a half.
Before we get started, I was just reading the latest issue of Variety yesterday, and thinking about this panel, and one of their big articles was called "Banking on Docs: Financing Nonfiction Films Eases with Streaming Platforms in the Mix." So I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from this article to contextualize a little bit about where certain things are at in the documentary film world. I've been programming for about 12 years. I've taught documentary film history for many, many years and worked in various other organizations in the doc world, but I certainly don't know as much about the financing part as our esteemed panelists here. But this is just a couple of quotes from this article. First off, as many of you probably know, 5 documentaries are among 2018's top 100 box office grossing films from the year. Won't You Be My Neighbor, 22 million, 3 Identical Strangers, Fahrenheit 11/9, and Free Solo. And also, Diane Weierman is sort of interviewed a lot in this, who's a participant. And basically, this is an article about streaming platforms entering the mix. And she says, there are more outlets, buyers, and the audience is hungrier for nonfiction. The sea change has been the advent of streaming outlets looking for contents for their platforms. That's good news. Although there are more opportunities than ever, it's still difficult and challenging, even with greater financing available. Netflix is now a major backer. A filmmaker's track record and a superstar subject advance the probability of financing. And then lastly, the documentary world is largely driven by passion and commitment. It's not driven by money or the business, but driven by a person's commitment to a story and how doggedly they pursue it, financing or not. And with that, in just sort of emailing and talking with some of the panelists, we were slightly uncomfortable with the definition of making it and in this panel as a definitive sort of place that people arrive. So, because I think for many people in our world, or the filmmakers' world, making it is it's a struggle, and there are years that are better and years that are worse. So I want to just go through, and Marshall, we were talking about it upstairs. What does making it mean to you?
I guess there's a financial side of it, which is that the work that I'm doing generates enough money that I'm able to continue making projects that I care a lot about. And then, in my mind anyway, there's also kind of an audience side of it where I make movies because I want to connect with people. So when they seem to be finding audiences, that makes me feel more like I'm getting close to making it. But to your point, I think that for everybody, it is a constant struggle. I mean, there's a reason that this is a nonprofit business largely, and sometimes I even think like calling documentary business, it's like a contradiction in terms. It's more like writing poetry than it is like a business. You know, you hope that you can find a way to sustain the thing that you love, and that people will read your poems, but that's not really the reason that you write the poems.
I would read your poems. Judith, do you have anything to add to that about, because you have a career path. For those that don't know, haven't read her bio, Judith is someone who's not only a successful filmmaker of feature-length films, but was part of the team that founded Chicken and Egg and worked there for many years as its creative
I was creative director.
Exactly, which
10
which
years.
for you was somewhat of a day job, not to sound disparaging, but it was something that allowed you to continue.
Well, it was a joy job, right?
Yes. I don't mean day
when
job in a pejorative sense.
And I helped co-found that organization. One was because we really understood, we call it chicken and egg, because we understood the chicken and egg conundrum that so many filmmakers, all filmmakers, we focus on women, nonfiction filmmakers, find themselves in. I have a great idea, I don't have the money to pursue this, or I have enough money to make a trailer, but I can't, and everyone loves this, but they want me to come back with a rough cut. What do I mean? And as our organization grew older and the field grew older and we grew older and our colleagues grew older, it's like, well, what does this mean as you become mid-career? What does this mean, what does it mean to really break through? So for me, I co-founded that one because I deeply believed we needed it. And it was also because I deeply believed that, I know how to teach, but what if I could help create an institution where I could actually, it would be the university I would want to teach in without all the red tape, and I could create the kind of education like that adult women really need to pursue their vision and their dreams and that kind of thing. So that's what I did, and it was one way to sort of address my own sustainability factor. But I think making it all depends on like what you think your future is supposed to look like and who you have to take care of. And now I'm a mother of a 4.5-year-old. So making it, I used to be able to kind of like, making it meant I could pursue and work on the kind of movies I want to work on. And that's what it meant. And so I lived in someone's living room for 6 years because it gave me all that freedom. And, I don't do that anymore, right? So, like, making it means that I get to be a storyteller, and my daughter sees me as someone who gets to pursue the kind of career that I love and I'm passionate about, and I still can really take care of her. And that's actually getting harder. So I'm in the throes of really figuring it out. So I left the more sustainable life to go back to really be an independent, hopefully not codependent filmmaker, finally finish a feature after 15 years, which I launched here this week.
So
and
this
piece
film,
it
you've been
together.
working on this film for 15 years, is that right? Wow.
Not a
I think
sustainable
that's another
model.
thing that people should, and what was that, sorry?
What's that?
I just think that's another thing people should keep in mind, that a lot of these films are
Well,
long
Yeah, I mean,
journeys.
a lot of things happened in between. I was doing lots of other things. It worked out. The time factor actually worked out for that movie. But, I think making it means, you either have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, but be so happy with, like, pursuing the vision that you could sustain a certain level of denial enough to feel like it's all going to work out, which is kind of how I'm living right now. I can't do that for very long, but it's okay. and then really be comfortable putting the pieces together and not having it all work out exactly at that moment all put together.
And Doug, you're someone who I know has an interesting career in as much as you've made, a film like Bisbee 17, which is not an overtly commercial film and has some avant-garde techniques to it, versus something more like Brewmaster, which I believe had a brand involvement and is a little bit more conventional and upbeat and these kind of things. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance those two things to sort of make it in whatever way you want to define making it?
Yeah, I think the model that I've come to describe what I do or Fourth Row Films with my producing partner Susan Bedusa, who's somewhere out here, it is sort of I would look at it almost like a traditional newspaper writer. So if anybody is old enough to know Pete Hamill, I think he wrote for most of the New York papers, the News and the Post, and I think he was RFK's speechwriter at one point. He's one of these guys who every week had his column, and every couple of years he'd write a book. And that's how, they're both writing. It's just one, you get to, go speak in a nice library and there's wine and cheese afterwards. And the other one, you kind of just goes out there and you hope I guess now in the internet age, you would get a response, but unless someone came up to you on the street and yelled at you, you probably wouldn't get much of a response. So that's really the balance of it. And the way that we finance, I think we've made 12 documentaries, and I think the first 4 were, because we don't have any patience, were made solely on the money we made from brands. So, we were not really grant people because that just takes so long. And we've started to get into that because now we're learning more about that, and we've, found the balance of that to get on that earlier. But, if you fall in love with a story, you just want to make it, you don't go, it's like meeting someone. You don't go, oh, I want to go on a date with someone in 9 months. You're like right now. And so that's really trying to find the balance of it. For making it, for me, would be, obviously, when you're lucky enough to get a movie made, and then you're maybe the success you're looking for goes up, is just purely based on being able to continuing to do this. If anybody's ever seen, I always think of that episode of Entourage with Martin Landau, and he's supposed to be like a guy who produced movies in the 70s that they all love. And they go to meet with him, and they're like, we thought you were retired. He's like, I'm not retired. The phone's just not ringing. What's his line? He goes, I've got a project for you if you like something like that. You never hear people saying they're retiring in the film business unless they're basically telling you they're senile or something, and actors can't read lines. So I think it's just sustaining doing this as long as possible. No one retires because it's awesome. So it's just being able to do it as long as possible would be success in my mind.
And Stephanie, you're someone who also has had 3 standalone feature films, all of which have received a lot of acclaim, and also does a fair amount of commercial work. Can you talk about how you sort of handle the balance and how you would define making it?
Yeah, I just want to note real quick that Judith Chicken and Egg Pictures was my first grant, actually, for my first film, Whiny Mommy, and Judith was very instrumental in, mentoring me and continues to mentor me to this day. So I think that, part of her making it has been making me in some ways, and making so many female filmmakers out there, having so much patience and so much kindness and generosity with her time and creative ideas. And that's something that, I think about in terms of making it as well. For me, making it is just being able to continue making work that I want to make, and not just be seen as a documentary filmmaker, but as an artist, and figuring out what do I have to do in my work to help express that and get paid and live. But really, if I can just figure out a way to just continue making work that I believe in, and then leaving an imprint for the others to think about work in a different way, think about a subject matter in a different way, and then also possibly to mentor other female filmmakers. That's, all those things, which is what everyone's doing up here, we're all trying to do, I think would be really wonderful in an ideal world.
I have no doubt that that's going to happen for you.
Can each of you talk about some of what you think are sort of the biggest challenges you face as the industry continues to evolve, to continue to just sort of keep afloat and keep things going the way you want things to go?
I think that the distribution model right now is sort of one-sided, and I think it's really hard to work within this very lopsided distribution model where where these Netflix and Amazons are coming in and changing the way that films are being made and who's getting to make films. I think it is great. I think it's making more opportunities available to more filmmakers, but I also think that it is challenging independent filmmakers who are pursuing something that might not seem so commercial, or might not seem so doesn't fit into a box. I feel like we're filling boxes sometimes, and I think that goes to the detriment of the filmmaker and the artistry of the form.
I'll say also not, the Netflix is great and Hulu and these folks are great in their willingness and ability to pay real money for documentaries, which has not always been the case. One of the challenges of the new models, though, are that a lot of times these deals are lifetime. You make something for Netflix, they pay you, and that's it. And I'll say my first film.
Meaning what?
Meaning you get paid, but you're not going to be able to make money when you sell it to another country. You're not going to be able to make money on DVD sales. You're not going to make money in any other way besides that one deal. And my first film, Street Fights, about Cory Booker, who's now the senator from New Jersey, but when he was a unknown city councilman running for mayor of Newark, I followed that election, and partly just by the luck that Cory Booker has gone on to continue to do things, but I sold it to Netflix for 3 years, then that expired, then I sold it to somebody else for 3 years, then I sold it back to Netflix, and
That was what, 12 years ago, or that was
yeah.
just to
So the
put things in
election was
perspective.
2002. The movie came out in 2006. So yeah, that's 12
You
years
need to
ago.
get it back before he runs for president.
Well, I do. I completely own it. I own it 100%. So, and I constantly am selling. I continue to sell it every few years and it continues to.
Where is it now?
Front the money. Netflix has it, and Hulu has. Amazon. You can see it on Amazon, and all of those are separate deals that some festival in Poland recently said, "Oh, we want to show it," and they paid $1,000 to show it, and just kind of those trickles of money enable me to keep getting a new project started without having to worry as much.
I imagine if Cory Booker runs for president, there's going to be a great deal of interest in the film, right?
Maybe. And again, that's the unicorn project. Most of the time that when you make a project, I'm not saying the business model is find somebody who's going to be running for president in 15 years. That's not helpful. But even my other films, money continues to come in from them years later. And I think, over the course of a career, you can build a body of work that will just keep, that costs you stuff because you still have to pay attention to it and there's things that you still have to do, but that can continue to feed you, and that becomes harder if you make a movie that somebody else owns and you just get paid. Although you do get paid, so there's a trade-off there.
I think they want to do a retrospective, or I want to be able to say, sure, I'll come with my new film to your university, but I'd rather come for the week, and here are the 10 classes I could teach, and here are the 3 screenings I could do, and I need $10,000 for the week. And you could actually, it's a credible ask, or 50. There are some people who could go and they could get that for one speech, right? But I think that if you have a body of work, there is a way for you to actually, build a certain level of sustainability, even just going and doing, those speaking gigs, because you're able to sort of build from one film to another. There's a trajectory, there's a creative trajectory, and there's a way to sort of talk about it. And I think that's a very critical and important thing to be able to do.
And that's the other side of the making it thing too, is the sort of artistic side of making it, controlling your work and being able to say, you want to show my film to your nonprofit in Tulsa? Sure, go ahead and do it. I don't have to ask somebody for permission to let you do it. That is super important to me just personally. And so, wherever I can, I include in my distribution deals the right to be able to approve without having to ask some limited number of screenings, or I want my work to be able to be seen by people who want to see it, and making sure that you defend that right, to me, is an important part of getting happiness out of the work that we do.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things in terms of the influx of let's say the 5 movies that you mentioned that made that the top 100. I mean, I think there's a good and a bad to that. I mean, there's never been a time where, I live in a community where there's not a lot of probably people grew up liking or even watching any documentaries, and they're like, oh, I like documentaries, like now, as if I'm some species, and they're happy to tell me that. But I feel we're also in this moment of very much like independent film, meaning more scripted film of the late 80s, early 90s, after Sex, Lies, and Videotape came out and made 30 million, 30-something million, which until Blair Witch was the highest grossing independent film. And that when you go meet with some of these places, they're not looking for a film like the first, like Bisbee, if you know that film that we made, or something. They're they might be happy you made that, but they're looking for something that's going to be one of those top 5. And so it's a sort of a double-edged sword in terms of there's more people talking about it, but what their expectations really are. I also feel that people, and that's what's so great about this panel and some of the other ones here, just don't talk enough about what the economics are of it. So because we've worked with one filmmaker in particular who's a lot of his work is very artistic, we get a lot of first-time or second-time filmmakers saying, I've got exactly what you need, something just like that. And not understanding, because the films we made have gotten a lot of press, what the economics are to that. And, with one film, the director of Bisbee, Robert Greene, we produced 6 of his films. It really took until the 4th one for people outside, really in the inner circle of documentaries, to start noticing them. And, we had a proposal, and it was going to be for this amount of money. And then it just got to the point, should we just make it for this? And like you were saying, a body of work, the next thing 10 years later, he's got 6 films. And that, but if we were waiting to get the money for the original proposal, we might still be here in the lobby looking for the woman who just left Imagine, trying to pitch her, for that money. And it's just, there is something to be said for just getting the movies made early on.
So, in as much as you can speak about Robert, would you consider Robert as someone who's sort of making it comfortably now? I mean, he is someone that continues to make sort of challenging films that are really appreciated by people probably in this room and our audiences. But he does have 6 films, and he teaches, right? At
at a certain point he started looking he had worked on staff at our company for about 10 years, and then exactly what you're saying. And then the big plot twist came, which is married with 2 kids. And so that changes a lot. And then so the idea was that model of getting a teaching job, which he went to University of Missouri to do, there's a lot of concern about that because I'm going to be in Missouri. But if anybody's ever had friends that moved to like Texas, you don't see it. You want to get together this week? No. But when they, because they live down the block, but when they move away, it's like you make time. So and I think actually, turned out to be a good thing. I think he's definitely making it, but I think he's at that point where he would like the economics to catch up with all the other benefits of it. And I would hope after Bisbee and these other films, it's at a place where if someone asked him to go make a film about a subject that for Netflix or somebody, that he's built up enough credibility that's not going to derail what he's trying to do, because it is tough for the economics of some of these movies. Like when you said, "Oh, it's not an obvious commercial movie," it's like we were hoping it would be. I mean, to some extent, we've got guns and stuff.
Speaking of an obviously commercial film, one of the things that's notable about the films that have done so well this year, like RBG and Mr. Rogers' film, is that they're about a star that many people know. I'm wondering if any of you can speak to, or even the Earth Liberation Front film, which you made, which is not about a star like Cory Booker, who I realized wasn't a star in the traditional sense of the time, but it's about an easily identifiable issue film about a group that people have heard of. What advice do you guys have for making a film that doesn't fall into those categories? It's not about and I think Stephanie, maybe you can touch on this. It's not about a star, someone everyone knows about, or a very like Reversing Roe, Ricky and Annie's film about Roe versus Wade that's on Netflix, where it's an easily identifiable topic or controversy. Can you speak to a little to that, or advice you have on sort of getting those films made and inhabiting that aspect of the industry?
Yeah, so I don't make any films with stars. So, yeah, I think that it goes back to sort of your intro, this like when you were quoting the Variety article, I think that you just have to have really a lot of passion for the subject and what you're doing, and believing that the way you're going to tell this story merits both funding and it's going to connect to an audience, because you're going to do it in a way that people don't think about this subject matter in that way. And so these people are stars because their humanity is so amazing, and the way that they're tackling the subject is so different. So, I mean, for me, that's what drives me in all of my filmmaking. I'm actually trying to do a project right now with a star, which is interesting. And Marshall knows about it, so it's a whole different beast. But yeah, I think that if you believe that your subject is hasn't been spoken about in this way, which is why I always take on these subject matters. I don't think that the way that I talk about, sex trafficking or Chinese adoption or the child welfare system, I don't think that the way that I've done it in my films is usually done in the media. That's why, and that's what I write about in my grants, my proposals, is just why this is different and why this needs to be done in this way, in this artistic, cinematic way. So I don't know if that helps.
The one thing I would say to that, again, because we've been lucky enough to sort of do things like Brewmaster, which, is, and things that are, that someone who probably would watch Brewmaster is never going to, you would never say, if you like this, you'd go to this one, and vice versa, is that the way I try and look at it for these jobs, not that we don't want to do them, but that we just have an opportunity to make a movie and we want to go and keep making movies, is more, I think the way like people maybe they talk about in the 40s or 50s or even the 60s and 70s, it's like there's a movie, it's about whatever it's about, and it's up to you as the filmmaker to get yourself into it. Are you just a filmmaker based on the choice of the topic? I mean, because if that's the case, you could pick a really artistic topic and the movie could suck. So, what about having the confines of it's got to be about this person or this subject, and still somehow trying to get your art or your philosophy or your message or how you're trying to touch people in that. And I do get, it's interesting in the doc community, it's sort of like, hey, because I've been able to sit in both tables, like we're at this table, if life is always like a high school cafeteria, like we're at this table, we're the really artsy doc table. That's the big brand and art and, the RBG, the big, the name brand movie table. And those tables are fighting with each other. Well, the cheerleaders and the quarterbacks, Hollywood, we're all at the loser table to them. It doesn't make a difference. So I don't know why the two alternative tables are always putting, well, these guys don't think enough about what's going to make money, and these guys, they're not artistic enough. It's like there's a lot of fighting between those groups when it's like we're still in
We're all losers.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you mean
we're
fight-
all sitting near the kitchen ladies at the worst table in the cafeteria, and you should be trying to help each other as opposed. It's like, if you can get that movie made, like Brewmaster is I'll just say no one would ever known me as a beer drinker, and I'll leave it at that. But if you watch that movie, when I introduce it, I'm like, the whole movie is a metaphor for working in independent film. And if you watch that movie and go through it, you'll go like, he just totally snuck his philosophy in this. It's all about two guys trying to make their passion into their career, which is, I feel, what I've done and what we've done at Fourth Row or Robert or any of the people we work with. And that's what the whole movie's about. To someone who loves beer, they'll go, it's a love letter to beer. To anybody paying attention, it's much further than that. And so, would I have chosen to make Brewmaster if I could make anything? Probably not. But with the opportunity to make it, you make it your own film.
I think one other definition of sort of making it is not doing what everyone's doing. So if you're at the table near the lunch ladies, turn to the lunch ladies and ask them, how are you? Find out what's really going on inside the cafeteria, and I guarantee you they probably have a really interesting, compelling story that's of the moment, that's incredibly timely, that when everyone's looking in that direction, you got to go in the other direction. And when you do, and you find that unique voice, then you find your own voice. And the way to make it is for someone to be able to say, oh, I want to see that movie because it's going to be that Stephanie Wang-Breal movie. It's going to have her voice, and I love when she talks cinematically, and I love the people that she talks to, and I love how long she hangs out with them, and I love the fact that they trust her so much with their story that she gets in a way that I've never seen quite before. That's making it. And you have to identify, you have to find that thing that makes it your own unique, Marshall Curry voice, because that's a really different kind of movie. And I think that's the hardest thing, to be able to have the time and the space and the belief from other people, the belief in yourself and that belief from other people in whatever way that means, so that you could have the time to find your voice, to craft it, to be in the cutting room. It all takes time. And that's all about money on some level,
But let me ask you this. Let's say, because I love to eat, and so I compare things to food. Let's say everybody wants to be a chef. If you were to compare that to me, everybody wants to be that auteur. Let's say just the opportunities don't fall into place for you. Like I would say, if anybody knows like 11 Madison Park, which I've only been to luckily because someone took me there once.
Is that a restaurant?
Let's
I
say
didn't
that,
even know.
So let's say or some fancy restaurant, but let's say you can't be the chef there. Do you love cooking enough to just go cook at a diner? In other words, do you want to be a chef or do you want to cook? In other words, so do you want to make films, or is it all about just being an artist, documentarian? Not that you can't be both, but
I
do
think
you see what I
finding
mean?
your voice doesn't mean that you're an auteur. I think
Well,
that it means that you find a unique way to craft your story.
Oh, I totally agree. But I mean, if you're not at first given that opportunity to, where it's like you have to create your voice, whatever you're making. I always say if you.
I was a cook. I graduated from college with a degree in history and economics, and I realized I wanted to make films. So I went and worked at CNN. I worked on the night shift. I went to work at 3 a.m. I finished at noon, and then I went on worked on independent films. And then from there, I worked at all these other odd jobs on independent films and productions, and I ended up at MTV producing for many years. And at MTV, I pitched a bunch of projects, and they liked them, and they would give them to male directors, and I would produce them. So I finally said, the only way I'm ever going to make my own films is if I do it on my own. I've made enough money. I have enough money in the bank to get started. Maurice Alberti, DP, well-known French cinematographer, and I were on a tech scout. I told her about this idea that I wanted to make about Chinese adoption, and she sat in the car with me in French and was like yelling at me to get out of the car and to go make this movie. So I was a cook for 10 years before I became a chef, and I learned everything I could.
But that's just it. That's great. I mean, that's where you learn
Yeah.
the
So-
craft, and then you save that money. I mean, the first couple.
And my first film was okay. It was good. I mean, but like in terms of the craft.
But there was a moment in that movie when Stephanie applied to Chicken and Egg Pictures, and luckily we kept playing this 20 or 30-minute sampler, and there was a moment in the film when she sort of broke through the wall, and because she could speak Chinese, she translated what this beautiful little girl who was 6 years old, who had just been adopted, came to America, did not speak English. She and her mother were in a very, adopted mother, were in a very, very painful moment. And Stephanie became the arbiter between this incredibly, this loving mother who did not understand her daughter, who was distraught and desperately wanted to go home to China. And Stephanie had to tell her she wants to go home. She's really unhappy here. And she realized that she had to be that interlocutor. And when we saw that she could kind of break all those walls and be that interlocutor, and that it included her voice and it included the complexity of this story of all sides, it was like, we want to work with that filmmaker. And
I borrowed gear from everyone I knew that I worked on from MTV days. So, yeah, you just really have to figure out how you're going to make it. How are you going to make your first film? How are you going to make the story that you want to make and do it in the way that you want to do it as well on top of that?
And it doesn't have to be a feature. It could be a short. We're in the moment of like shorts, as you can attest, right now, are very, very powerful vehicle, both because people do want to see them and there are outlets for them, but it's also a great way for you to experiment and express yourself, and the stakes are not as high as making a 75, 85, or 90-minute film. It doesn't take as long, it doesn't take as much money, and you get to practice.
We're going to take a couple of questions from the audience, starting with the gentleman over here at the microphone.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael LaRue. Full disclosure, this is my first film festival. So
Welcome.
Yes.
Thanks for coming. Keep
I don't
coming
know
back.
the rules, and I'm sure I'm going to alienate every single person in this room right now, but I cannot hold my tongue any longer. I put down $1,000 and I got an all-access pass, and I went to everything. If I couldn't hit both, I hit the first 15 minutes and then went to the other one. And I've heard one common thread through this entire 8-day festival. And the only thing I've heard from every single panelist is, there's no money to be made here. You're not going to make any money. You'll never make money. You're going to live in poverty. Well, I expect to be profitable. I'm not going to do a business if it's not profitable. And the other thing I keep hearing is that there's this evil empire called Netflix that's buying up everything. Well, Netflix is not a charity. They're not going to buy something up if there's not money to be made there. So what are we doing wrong as a community where we're giving all the money away to someone else?
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone called Netflix an evil empire. In fact, Marshall praised Netflix. And I don't think anyone expressed that they were living in poverty. People have expressed struggles that they're facing, like I think anyone in any industry faces, whether you're a restaurateur or a writer or whatever, a lot of people. And I think documentary filmmaking is not an obvious industry if you just want to make a ton of money. So, I mean, I'm sitting up here with 4 people who have successful careers, 3 of which who I've known for a long time. So I don't think we want to give the impression that you're, resigning yourself to a lifetime of poverty if you choose this this career path. I think what we're trying to do is have a frank discussion of the challenges that people face.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I agree. I don't think Netflix is a bad thing by any means for us as filmmakers. I guess the point I was trying to make that maybe would help is that what I'm trying to say is while you're trying to get the movies you want to get made, it's maybe more comparable to someone starting out acting or writing. Is your side job like working as a waiter or at Starbucks, or is your side job somehow in honing the tools and skills to when you get that chance to make that? And I fiercely argue for, while you're working on that passion project that hopefully is going to launch your feature career, do something that at least you're using those same tools and skills to do. Whether that's a marketing thing or something for a nonprofit or shorts, but to spend that other time within the same field and not something completely removed. Someone else might say, no, just have those 2 things separate. I'm just saying to do that, and with those, make money.
And I just want to say, I think there's been a recurring theme amongst us is like, we are deeply passionate about the work that we do. I mean, as Marshall had stated at the beginning, it's like we're poets. We're doing something that is, we're doing art. We're creating art, and we're so lucky to be creating art. Yeah. And to be able to go into these communities and do these things and talk about these worlds that we get to access that no one else does. So, there is...
And we hope that we turn out like Robert Frost. You hope to be the poet that sells millions and millions of copies, but there's a lot of poets who don't, and you don't want it. You should go into it with eyes wide open.
And that's why it's important to make the movies you want, because when it's all said and done, it's just those movies. I'll just briefly, when Robert Greene and I met, he was a video clerk at St. Mark's. And we met, and I was going to hire him, and I'm like, what do you want to do? He's like, I want to make movies. And basically what he's saying is, if anyone remembers, Kim's on St. Mark's, it's like the whole differentiator was it was by filmmaker. And they had these cheesy, like, cardboard or like plastic white cards with a name, and he just wanted to be one of those names, and it took 4 films to get that. And I'm like, we're going to make those films. They might not have the most money to make them, but we're going to get them made. So yeah, I think it's just about trying to get films made.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the art aspect, definitely. And the subject of my film is the late actress Rue McClanahan. And Rue always used to say something to me. She'd say, Michael, remember the phrase is show business. Don't forget the business part.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we're in the business of humanity, ultimately, I think, and that's what's driving us. I mean, we're all up here saying it would be nice if we had some, make it a little bit easier, but I think that ultimately we're all in this for the business of humanity.
Next question, please.
I would just like to ask,
Pull the microphone down a little bit if you could, sorry.
for 4 successful filmmakers, how do you navigate between eyeballs and raising funds for a next project, especially in the social justice arena? Like, how do you navigate between, is it more important for people to see this, or is it more important for this to make money so that it can go toward the issue? How do you navigate that? Thank you.
Well, I think it's really important to figure out who the right eyeballs are and who those right audiences are and how to figure out how to get to them. Just something that, that's a whole field now that we've been working on in different ways, over the last 20 some odd years. Some people call it impact, some people call it audience engagement. I think it's really possible, and I think the last couple of years, people have really been striving to sort of merge those two. So whenever they have the opportunity to be, they're having their semi-theatrical or their theatrical run, they're thinking to themselves, okay, I have to fill 300 seats. I want to fill 300 seats. I'd rather do it here than I would in a church where they're not going to pay for it. But I want to fill those seats with the people that would want to go to the church and would want to see this film. And I'm going to figure out who, while I have that week or that second week, and while I'm trying to push it to get into that third week and held over, I'm going to do everything in my power to be able to use everything I know about getting the right audiences and targeting them and bringing them together and using the legitimacy and the excitement of being in a theater to actually talk about those issues. And it is possible to do well and to do good, even in the context of that kind of small theatrical run at the same time. And if I could leverage some press and I could, get the issue, in the art section and in the lifestyle section or in the health section or in the business section, or in the city section, and kind of blur all these lines, then I'm doing good and I'm doing well and all that at the same time. So I think that it's incredibly, that it's possible. And it's very exciting to be able to do that. And that there's a lot of leverageable ways of doing that. And you could also just say to yourself, I have these goals for what I think this film can do. I'm going to find those very strategic eyeballs. I'm going to make sure that happens. And that might not happen in the context of how I sell this. But there's lots of different ways to sell a movie.
I would say the one thing we've learned, or we think we've learned, is that people who like movies or documentary movies go to documentaries, and not necessarily people who are interested in that subject. If they're not a moviegoer, then you need to figure out this way to get them there. So someone could be, I've got this great basketball movie. Everybody who likes basketball is going to go. They're not, because they're watching basketball or doing something else. And so, you're hoping that their friends that love movies are like, I know you only go to 2 movies a year. This is the one you want to go to. And I think after the experience with Bisbee and a couple of our films before, if we have the ability to, we want to put into the initial budget some outreach campaign to get to those sub things. We had an outreach person on Bisbee, and it made a huge, she was finding people and being able to talk to a group of people. We were like, this is amazing. And thinking about what those groups could potentially be, but what we learned is that needs to start in the beginning now, because they don't give the films as much time to sort of grow, maybe because there's so many. We're used to, by the second or third week, those people start to show up. It's more like regular films, movies, as we say now, where they kind of has to happen right away. And so that would be one piece of advice, is to think about that earlier than maybe you want to, about how you're going to get to those groups.
I think just make a really good film. And I think down the road, things happen that you would never expect. But keep making really good films. Something just happened to me recently in San Diego, where someone came up to me and he's like, I saw Whitey Mommy 2010 in DC, and I knew you were playing here, so I came to see your movie. And he came. He says that he never does this, but he's also Jay Duplass's assistant, and he wants Jay to see my work. That was totally random. That's just happened. So hopefully people will just, if you make good films, people will be connecting to them and wanting to help support you and figure out ways to connect you to people.
That
so
just
that
happened?
You can yeah, it just happened. That was great. But who knows? And who knows what's going to ever happen? I mean, it doesn't matter. Just this person's been following my work. Who does that? It's amazing.
Next question, please.
Well, piggybacking on the audience question, I think, can you talk about the way that we can think making it as a filmmaker in the future in relation to audiences not really paying for content anymore outside of a streaming platform or a big theatrical event? Is the future the whole self-distribution model we're talking about, finding your audience? And there's Patreon now about funding filmmakers as artists, if you're familiar, right? So what do you think about the trends making it in the future in relation to audiences actually paying for our movies? I
don't know. I mean, sort of taking a little step back from that, I feel like one of the things that I'm constantly wrestling with when I'm trying to decide, you know, if I have 10 ideas for projects, how do I decide which one I'm going to do? And to me, there's sort of three different pieces that I'm thinking about. One is the art of it, like what feels to me like a interesting movie to make and to watch. Then there's often, but not always, some political or social element to it. I happen to be interested in politics, and so, and like a lot of people, I care about how the work that I'm doing affects the world. So that's another piece of it. And then the third piece is the money side, whether that's, you know, audiences or whatever. How commercial is this thing going to be? Are there going to be audiences for it? Is there a market for a story like this? And those three pieces, sometimes, you know, in the best case scenario, they all come together, and you find a movie like the Mr. Rogers movie that is artistically beautiful. It's a great social story, and it's super commercial. And it's great when those three pieces work together. A lot of times, those three pieces fight each other, though, and the more artistic movie isn't as socially relevant. So, for me, Street Fight, the Cory Booker film, I was interested in this election, but the election was between two African-American Democrats, which made it very interesting to me because election films don't usually carve up communities that small. It sort of sees the African-American political establishment as a monolith, which in fact it's not. And so I was interested in, like, well, what's the difference between somebody who's 32 years old and somebody who's, you know, who was born after the Civil Rights Movement and somebody who's sort of a alum of the Civil Rights Movement. But doing that, so that was artistically interesting to me, but it made it a much harder sell as a movie because it's hard to get an audience. You know, you can't, the DNC is not going to do a mailing. If it had been a film about a white person against a black person, or if it had been a film about a Republican versus a Democrat, you could kind of, it would fit into categories that people expect, and they know who to pull for and who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And but that made it messier. Or even if A Tree Falls, the one about the Earth Liberation Front, it's about a very radical environmentalist who burned timber companies, and no environmental groups would support the release of the movie. They hate the Earth Liberation Front because they think that the Earth Liberation Front makes them look like crazy terrorists. And so the industry people weren't supporting the film. The environmentalists really weren't supporting the film, and that made it hard to, as a marketing tool, to you know, harness other organizations or to.
Luckily, the film festival programmers loved it.
Well, I mean, it was lucky that way, and that was because I was focused on the art of piece of those three, right? But I do think it's worth being, particularly if you're looking at 4 different films and you're saying, which one should I do? If you can find ones that check all of those boxes, then God bless you. But if it's only going to check one box or it's going to check 2 boxes, just be aware of the trade-offs that you're making. So, you know, it may be a great choice to make a beautiful artistic film that is going to be really hard to sell, or a political film that's not artistic but it packs a punch. But just think carefully about those 3 pieces and the way they work together or fight each other.
So we got to wrap things up. So we have time for a last quick comment from you, Doug.
How many first-time filmmakers are here, or people thinking about making their first time? I would say, the way Marshall described that is perfect. I would say, not because I did it, I would say just looking at people's career in retrospect, if it's that first one, I would focus on the art one, because that's your introduction and how people will look at you, and they'll remember, they'll bring that with you to whatever you do after that. And beyond that, just it has to just be something. Any of these films are so tough that you just love the subject so much. I always compare it to like throwing a party for your surprise party, and you get everyone together. We're going to throw a surprise party for our friend, right? By the time it comes time to the night of the party, 3 are already not on it, and by the time it comes to cleaning up the party, it's just you. Like, you have to love that movie so much, you're going to go through everything for it.
And I would say it should be one that you have very, very, very unique access to. Because the thing that will be the difference between you, and a much more experienced filmmaker, if you're both making the same topic, is that you have really unique access. There's no way that any of us could make that movie. Only you could make that movie, and that's what's going to determine someone, like Bing Lau's film, which is getting so much attention. Only he could make that movie. It's called Minding the Gap, which you'll see, read about it, look at it, find that movie. It has been
It's playing here. I think it's playing today here. Next door, yeah.
Oh.
But it's also on Hulu because I actually watched it 2 nights ago and it was
then
amazing.
watch what happens over the next couple of months when the shortlists happen and all that kind of stuff. But it's because it was totally unique and very, very, very specific. And he's gone on to do other things, and he'll do lots of other things. But that one was his story that no one else could tell.
Well, I want to thank our panelists so much for coming out, and thanks to Meredith and Eric.